And so with a trust, what you could do is, since I don't own the trust, I am just a beneficiary or a trustee, the trust or the board of directors, the trustees, whoever it happens to be that is in the position of power to do something for the trust, can lease land to people, for example. It can say, well, you get a 99-year lease for that piece of land underneath your house. You want to have a 3,000 square foot house? Let's give you however much land you need for that, and you get exclusive control over that. You pay $100 a month for it, or $1,000 a month, whatever the going rate is for a lease of land. And the rest of the land is held not in common, but the word that I came across is it's trustery. It's like it's held in trust. There's the stuff that's held in common, and then there's the stuff. And the stuff in common is things that you can actually own, like a chair or a car or physical things. But the things that are considered trustery are the air, the water, the things that you get a lease on, basically. It's not yours to own. And yes, that's kind of a socialistic kind of perspective, but there are certain things that in today's society is like, well, this logging company owns the river. It's like, yes, that is the way that it's set up today, but so yeah.
Isn't that like the Henry George philosophy?
There's a lot of thinkers that have certainly thought about that, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right way of going about it, but that is something that I think needs to be considered when you're talking about these types of things. Like if you have a group of people and just someone decides to open up a junkyard or pour oil on the ground, what do you need? And you need to think about those types of things. Like not necessarily that particular issue, but what would happen if someone were to damage these natural resources that everyone kind of is dependent on? Yeah.
I was just going to say, and it's more complex than individual property rights because you're talking about mutually held interests and risks and responsibilities. That's what the trust is. It's that group of people who share those risks, benefits, and rights.
Yeah.
To put it simply, it's the ecological system that we live in. It's the rivers, it's the forests, it's whatever. It's what we live in, and a lot of people are affected by it. It's not one individual.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can necessarily say a logging company owns a river.
Right, and it's not that that's necessarily the focus of the conversation.
Yeah,
but
no,
I
know.
That's something that needs to be considered, and not that needs to be considered up front, because they're agreements and not rules. Rules come from above, but they're agreements between ourselves. Where it's like, you know what, this isn't something we considered, it's something we need to think about. Let's come up with an agreement now because we realize that somebody just dug a hole in the driveway and that didn't work out for everyone.
Right, it's kind of like insurance in that regard.
And there's actually whole books on this. The one I've read is Creating a Life Together. Have you read that one? Okay.
Yep.
Diana Leaf Christian, and she was the editor of Communities magazine.
Yeah, I know Communities magazine.
Okay, so she for 10 years, looked at what the practices were of all these intentional communities and wrote it up in a book. Like, this seems to work. This is probably a pretty bad idea.
Yeah.
It's a good book to look at.
One of my goals is to not have a hierarchical decision-making structure where these people are in charge, and if you screw up and they don't like you, then they get to go, or they get to make you go away. I want people to be able to have a sense of ownership in whatever entity they live on, and not have the renter mentality of, well, it's not mine.
Right.
And because I want people to invest in the land, grow things, raise animals, and if you can't afford to buy 10 acres for yourself, like we want to have a cow, and we'd like to have a barn, and get the milk from the cow. But we don't need that all to ourselves. A cow can make a lot of milk, and more than I can consume, and so how would you share a resource like that? And how would you share it in such a way that is safe for everyone and legal, and let's say that society collapses all around us, what would you do in that type of situation? The just-in-time delivery systems that we have to the grocery store is going to run out of food in 3 days. If those supply lines cut off, what will you do? And I want to be able to reach out to my community, and if I get to pick my neighbors, fantastic. If I get to pick everyone at Porcfest to live with me, and we have a community, And we harvest from the land, and we raise animals, and we're stewards of the land, and everyone feels like they have a sense of ownership, but no one's in charge. How do you make it so that no one's in charge, and yet, you get things done?
Can I ask a question or pose it to you, and maybe we can discuss it now or later? In this scenario where we have peak milk, and we know, that it's a possibility that if our supply lines were, for some reason, disrupted. I also know that what people would cooperatively own, maintain, and have would suddenly look very attractive to a wide variety of people who had not done such preparations, who had not become part of a node or community. And part of the discussion of this has to be looking forward to that in terms of security agreements. I mean, I don't mean to sound alarmist or anything, but part of it has to be thinking about, well, if a man comes in and demands my cow, what the hell am I going to do?
Right, and that's why I think that the safety, and when I say a community, I'm thinking like 30 to 36 households worth of people. And there's a number, Barton's number or something like that.
400 number?
There is about 300 or 150 people or something like that. There's a number that I know your relationship to him and how you relate, and if you were to decide to leave the community, it's not like, oh, Nick is gone and now we don't have anybody to plow the driveway. With about 36 households of people, you kind of have some extra coverage, and it's also not so many people that you can't know everyone in your community.
And you have a sense of the confidence rating only to so many degrees.
Yep.
You can say, okay, well, I trust this person's judgment, and so that gets me 2 or 3 degrees away. But if it gets to be too large, there are too many holes in the safety net.
And there's this concept of like your bug out bag. If everything collapses in New York City, you're gonna bug out to get out of Dodge kind of thing. And there's no crisis today, but in 4 years from now, what would the situation still be? And you need to start building those things today, which is why I came to New Hampshire, because in California, things fall apart. Things are going to fall apart. And you might say, morally, I can't take somebody else's food. But if your child says, Mommy, I'm hungry, I don't care what your morals are. You're going to do what it takes to make sure your child doesn't say that. And that scares me.
So this is moral preparation too.
It's moral and it's not really like, I don't like to think of it like survivalism or prepping or anything like that. It's like, what do you have control over? If the oil ran out, what could you personally do about it? Nothing. And so how much of it, and yeah, it takes a lot of work to grow your own food, but if I choose to take on all that responsibility, it's my choice to do that. And in doing so, if government says, well, then we'll take away your whatever X happens to be, I'll be like, you know what, I don't really care, because I've made myself, self-reliant.
The other thing is, in a community, you don't necessarily have to be the guy that's the farmer.
Right.
You have to start having this specialization, just like we have in the greater society.
Like part of the idea, and I kind of alluded to it before, is like the cooperative model. It's like, I want to build a workshop. I think that it would be nice to have a workshop here on the land, or a swimming pool or something like that. But you know what? I don't have the money to exclusively lease that land like I did for my house. I exclusively leased that land for my house. But this is a resource that I don't mind sharing, as long as I get enjoyment out of it and I'm not taken advantage of. And so I say I want to have a workshop, and so I go to the community and I said, I'd like to have 20 square feet of land or 100 square feet of land, and anybody want to go in on it with me? It's going to cost me 20 grand to do it. Well, Jack says I want to get in on that too. I'll put in 10 grand. I'll put in 10 grand. We'll build this workshop, and people can throw in their, well, what happens if into the pots. We'll say, okay, to use the workshop, it's going to cost you $10 an hour if you want to use it. And I will get my enjoyment out of it. I put in 10 grand, so I get a lot of $10 hours out of that resource. And as people use it, as Nick uses it, he's going to pay $10 in, and that will go to repay the original investors. And then once the people have been repaid on their investment, then they can say, you know what, now I need to actually pay in to use this resource. And maybe the price will go down at that point. We just need to do the maintenance and fix the saw blades and the things that are going to get broken. for this particular resource.
And really just the overview is we're not going to settle all the details today. We're just encouraging people to get out there and start trying it and be patient and adjust it when it needs to be adjusted. And there are alternatives. We don't actually have to all march lockstep to this disaster, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So let's create. Mind if I just jump onto this? Okay. So I was trying to think of all the other types of alternative organizations and also make it only fit onto one line. So I just threw out social networks because this is something we all know about. There's, with internet social networking, it's just wild. There's social networks for every little niche group. There's Facebook for like everybody. They all have their different variations. I'm promoting freeagents.com. So there's ways that actually that some of these things merge and overlap, and the social networking is used for promoting members of a land trust community, and some of you use the social networks better than I do, and things like that, and I also want to open it up to like any other different types of alternative organizations. Like I don't want to lecture on this because a bunch of you know more about this stuff than I do, so.
I do want to make two comments on worker cooperatives. One that I think is mentioned almost in any conversation about worker cooperatives is Mondragon in Spain.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but even though it's involved with the state a bit here and there, maybe even heavily, it is one of the most successful worker cooperatives around presently. I believe it's been around for over 50 years. I think I watched a documentary on it. Second, I had the idea myself a few weeks ago. It just kind of struck me to over the red and black scandal. Was it black and red?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Red and Black Cafe.
Red and Black Cafe. Over the Red and Black Cafe scandal, I thought it'd be a cool idea in Keene or just in New Hampshire in general to start sort of worker cooperative coffee shop. I think that'd be really awesome.
I actually know a couple of people have already said they're going to do that, and I'm not sure how far they've gotten, and I don't remember who right now. But all you'd have to do is start a group on Facebook and invite all your friends, and you'd start having them pour in.
Yeah. It might even attract more people to Keene.
Yeah. And maybe you want to do it on Free Agents too. So anyway,
Sorry.
Promotional.
Excuse me.
But no, the social networks are a way that now people can actually reach out to each other like over a vast scale. And even if you don't live here yet and you want to make something happen, there'd probably be a way to, like, you could be a member at a distance and promote it and things like that. I mean, another alternative organization thing might be looking at all these different ways to do money. At Porcfest here, there's a bunch of different money systems floating around, and in society in general. A couple of years ago, we sort of pioneered it here. I'm just bragging at the Alternatives Expo, and we printed our own money, and you could use it to buy coffee from us. So our money has a little picture of a coffee mug on it. It's equal to 1/10 of an expo hour. And a full expo hour was good for pizza. So it was like commodity based, but the commodities were like coffee and pizza. So the money, the trade, the social networks, the land ownership, the co-ops buying and selling. I think we can do some amazing things, I think libertarians are more consistent philosophically than some of these other groups that have tried these things. Let's do a better job and make something that works even better.